So in the symposium's first session, we will focus on the big picture, the geopolitical horizon, and the future of defense in an uncertain world. Our first guest speaker will be Mr. Camile Grand, the NATO Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment. Mr. Grand has held this position since October 2016. He was previously director of the Foundation of Strategic Research, the leading French think tank on defense and security from 2008 to 2016. In this capacity, he contributed to several senior expert panels for NATO, the European Union, the United Nations, as well as for the French government. He has also held senior positions in the French Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense, and has taught at several French institutions of higher learning. He has published several books and monographs, as well as numerous articles in European and American journals on contemporary strategic issues, focused primarily on European security and nuclear policy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Grand.
Merci beaucoup, Colonel. Let me start with a few words in French. Mon général, cher Philippe, Monsieur le Chief Scientist, cher Brian, Monsieur le Directeur du CSO, cher Yann Mical, Mesdames et Messieurs les officiers généraux, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis, c'est vraiment un plaisir et un honneur pour moi de représenter le secrétaire général aujourd'hui pour marquer le 70e anniversaire des efforts de notre organisation en matière de sciences et de technologie. Malheureusement, le secrétaire général, comme vous le savez peut-être, est retenu à Bruxelles par une importante ministérielle qui prépare le sommet de Madrid dans 15 jours, où je crois qu'un certain nombre d'entre nous allons le rejoindre dans l'après-midi, et je m'excuse par avance de ne pas pouvoir suivre pour cette raison l'ensemble des débats de la journée. Je suis également évidemment particulièrement heureux d'être à Paris aujourd'hui et de retrouver de nombreux amis et collègues dans cette journée. It is really a pleasure to celebrate the 70th anniversary of NATO's original innovation engine. I believe it was called AGARD, which has nothing to do with Harry Potter, but was the advisory group for aerospace research and development and its successor. The science and technology community has always been a critical element of NATO's efforts and history, and I should say as the lead for the Defense Investment Division or closest partner in the NATO environment, as we've always strongly benefited from your efforts in our own role for the development of cutting-edge capabilities for the alliance and to foster armament cooperation amongst allies. While NATO relies heavily on industry and academia for innovation, organizations like the STO are critical enablers of these engagements. For over 70 years, they've brought government laboratories, industry, and academia together, providing a critical forum where ideas can be tested, collective creativity exploited. NATO needs this independent capability to make it a smart investor, an innovator, and a good buyer of technology. The nations needed to provide a forum whereby the sharing of ideas and the burden of capability development can happen naturally to the mutual benefit of the whole alliance. As we react to the changing military and geopolitical environment, challenged by climate change, technological development, and the return of great power politics, the importance of S&T and the capabilities it engenders have never been greater. We need to challenge ourselves, the nations and the alliance as a whole, to be more creative, more insightful, and more innovative. We should not take our technological edge for granted, and this is exactly what we're trying to do collectively in the Alliance Command for Transformation, in the STO community, and of course at NATO headquarters. But this is more than just technology. Evidence-based decision-making, building on rigorous research, advanced technologies, and insightful analysis will be necessary to address the hard challenges that NATO faces and will face today and in the future. We are here at a pivotal moment for our security. President Putin's war against Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe and shaken the entire international order. The bloodshed we thought Europe had banished to history book is back in Ukraine. Russia's brutality in destroying the lives and livelihoods of millions of Ukrainians will have lasting repercussions that threaten peace and stability in Europe and beyond. The current security shows that the revisionist authoritarian regimes will not hesitate to use brutal force to trample over the sovereign rights of other nations and tear up the European security order and the international rule-based order. But President Putin did not bank on the bravery of the Ukrainian people, the capability of Ukrainian forces, and the formidable support that many nations have shown in front of this senseless war. Ukraine can win this war, and we must continue to do everything we can to help Ukraine uphold the simple right to self-defense that is enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Over many years, and in particular since Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO and allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukraine forces and worked closely with the Ukrainians in multiple domains, including science and technology, as well as armament. Today, the Ukrainian forces are bigger, better led, better trained, and better equipped. And we see the difference that it is making every day in the battlefield. Since the war started on the 24th of February, allies have significantly stepped up their support to Ukraine, providing billions of dollars of weapons and other assistance. We must continue to step up and sustain this effort, building on the work of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group under US leadership that will meet today in Brussels. These initiatives will enable us to meet Ukraine's needs more rapidly as the war continues unabated. We must be prepared to stay the course to support Ukraine in the long haul and apply maximum pressure on President Putin to end this war. The consequences of this war will be long-term and far-reaching, not only for Ukraine, but for all of us in the transatlantic family of democratic nations and for the rest of the world. NATO's main responsibility is and remains to protect and defend all allies and every inch of allied soil. In light of the situation, we have significantly stepped up our deterrence and defense, including on the eastern flank of the alliance. We have doubled the number of multinational battle groups from the Baltics to the Black Sea. We have over 40,000 troops under direct NATO command, backed by significant air and naval assets. 100,000 troops are on high alert, ready to respond to any aggression and to prevent a spread of the war in Ukraine. This action built on the biggest adaptation of NATO's collective defense since the end of the Cold War. Following Russia's invasion in Ukraine in 2014, we have deployed battle groups on the eastern flank of our alliance. We've increased the readiness of our forces and established new defense domains, including space and cyberspace. We've invested massively in modern capabilities, and we've seen 8 years of real increase in defense spending by European allies and Canada. We expect 2/3 of allies to reach the 2% NATO baseline by 2024. When this defense investment plans were chosen, there were only 3 allies that were meeting that baseline. With more money for defense, allies have substantially increased the amount spent on major equipment, including related R&D. This is essential that we continue to invest in our security and that we sustain those efforts to meet not only the 2% target, but also the 20% in investment in new capabilities and research and development. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, while at the forefront of attention right now, as it should be, is part of a bigger picture of a drastically deteriorated security situation where authoritarian regimes such as Russia, but also China, are openly challenging core principles for security and undermining the rule-based international order. The rise of China is a defining issue for the world and for the transatlantic community as well. Allies are concerned about China's coercive policies, which stand in contrast to the rule-based international order and the fundamental values enshrined in the Washington Treaty. China is rapidly developing technologies and expanding its nuclear arsenal with more warheads and a larger number of sophisticated delivery systems. Of all the Chinese technology programs of concern, military-civil fusion is most directly involved in acquiring technologies to gain an edge over all militaries in the West. Examples include joint ventures between Chinese defense industrial groups and civilian makers of unmanned aerial vehicles to improve the People's Liberation Army UAV fleet. Perhaps you will touch upon these themes in your discussion on industry this afternoon. Overall, China remains opaque in implementing its military modernization. A recent European Union document noted that Chinese defense spending in the last 20 years increased by close to 600%, to be compared with an increase of about 20% in Europe, just as an interesting benchmark. Russia, it's about 200% only. Just to put things into a bit of economic context. So there is a NATO-wide effort spanning in multiple areas of work, including emerging and disruptive technologies and resilience, to address the various aspects of this changing environment, including China's growing influence in international policies, which could have consequences for security. Your discussion later today on the innovation environment will unpack some of the approaches to ensure we maintain our technological edge in this context. Technological innovations are changing the nature of peace, crisis, and conflict, and we can no longer take this hedge or military and technological hedge for granted, as I already stressed. China, and to a lesser extent Russia, and other major powers are dedicating significant and increasing resources to emerging and disruptive technologies in an effort to outpace the West, and are engaged in illicit technology transfers and intellectual property theft to enhance already potent non-conventional tools. The NATO Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic that you will hear about later in the day will work with startups, industry, and academia to promote transatlantic cooperation and help avoid capability gaps amongst allies. The NATO Innovation Fund will invest in startups working on emerging and disruptive technologies. NATO now has an artificial intelligence strategy, and allies have agreed on an EDT implementation strategy that sets out ways in which to work with partners, academia, and the private sector to develop new technologies more quickly and strengthen our industrial base. Space is one of the critical areas addressed in this implementation strategy. It is increasingly important for the security and prosperity of our nations and for NATO's deterrence and defense. NATO leaders agreed to accelerate work to deepen and expand NATO's use of space as an operational domain and to strengthen NATO's space domain awareness and better integrate space in all NATO's activities. As we segue into NATO 2030, which is our line of effort to modernize our alliance, I would briefly underline the importance of NATO's partnership. I know that the STO recognizes the importance of working with partners, which is why many of your structures welcome like-minded, technologically advanced partners such as Japan, Australia, and our close partners Finland and Sweden. NATO's partnerships are and will continue to be essential to the way NATO works. Relations with partners are based on reciprocity, mutual benefit, and mutual respect. Partners play an important role in supporting NATO's three core tasks and our 360-degree security approach. Allies are committed to expanding political dialogue and practical cooperation with any nation that shares the alliance values and interest in international peace and security. At the summit in Madrid, for the first time, the leaders of Asia-Pacific partners will be present. This is a significant step in itself. We will also welcome President Zelensky And of course, we will be talking about the partnerships for the future, so as they continue to meet the interests of both allies and partners. And mentioning partners, I shouldn't fail to mention the candidacy of both Sweden and Finland, and we certainly hope to achieve significant progress by the time of the summit in Madrid. The complexity of today's security environment requires dialogue with other international organizations. Cooperation with the EU in particular is of strategic importance. I will talk to it in more details in a moment. Ensuring that the alliance is ready for the challenge of today and tomorrow, as well as strong and united for a new era of increased global competition, is at the heart of the NATO 2030 agenda. As tasked by heads of states and government in 2019, the Secretary General developed proposals based on consultations with nations, civil society, and the support of an expert group. At the Brussels summit last year, NATO leaders agreed this ambitious transformation agenda for our future security. NATO's strength is its ability to adapt to the changing security environment and to ensure the continuity of its core tasks of collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. The NATO 2030 vision sets out the importance of holding more political consultations, reinforcing our collective defense with a strengthened military postures and increased readiness, enhancing our resilience and sharpening our technological edge. The NATO 2030 agenda includes 8 lines of efforts ranging from transatlantic consultations, upholding the rule-based international order and collective defense, to resilience, innovation, change and capacity, climate change and addressing climate change, capacity building for partners. And last but not least, NATO 2030 calls for a new strategic concept reflecting the radically transformed security situations since NATO's last strategic concept was agreed in 2010. It is high time for a new roadmap to design the future of the alliance, and let me confirm that the new strategic concept is well under development and I very much hope will be agreed in about 2 weeks to reflect an era of great power competition, recognize that unfortunately Russia has become one of the most important challenges to our security in Europe and beyond, as I mentioned, and will also reflect on China's role as a transformative player in world affairs. The importance of resilience and new technologies for Euro-Atlantic security will also be acknowledged, together with existing and emerging challenges from climate change to cyber threats. On deterrence and defense, the strategic concept will likely anticipate a new generation of our presence in the East. Indeed, at the Madrid summit, NATO leaders will adapt the alliance posture on the eastern flank for the longer term to reflect the new security reality. This is also likely to include measures for faster and more effective reinforcement. Overall, the new strategic concept is an important opportunity to reiterate our core values and purpose. Through this document, we will reset our deterrence and collective defense for the long term and continue to enhance the resilience of our democratic societies. We will aim to work more closely with like-minded partners from the European Union and the Asia-Pacific and to respond to the new security environment in a 360-degree perspective and in all domains. To achieve this, we will also need adequate resources and capabilities, and NATO is engaged in capability development efforts to address new threats and this new security environment. Coming back to our strategic partnership with the European Union, on security and defense, NATO and the EU are indispensable partners, two sides of the same coin, as many allies who are also EU member states have a single set of forces and budgetary line. The accession of Sweden and Finland will further strengthen that point, just as the recent Danish referendum to join CSDP in the EU context. NATO and EU share to a great extent the same history and geography. Both organizations share common values and security interests. They also face the same threats and challenges and do not have the luxury of choosing which one to handle first. They must deal with all of them at once. A task of this magnitude requires cooperation between the members of the two organizations, as well as between the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union proper. The current context with Russia's aggression on Ukraine has made the NATO-EU partnership even more relevant, I would argue. And we have leveraged this partnership to foster unity in responding to Russia's war, not least through a joint press conference between President Michel and President von der Leyen and the Secretary General on the 24th of February. Over the past 2 decades, the NATO and EU partnership has significantly evolved, one of the main catalysts in that respect being the developments since 2014, which played an important role in the signing of the Joint Declaration of 2016. Since then, we've achieved an unprecedented level of cooperation, as acknowledged in the Brussels Summit Declaration last year. This summit is particularly relevant for the NATO-EU partnership and the transatlantic bond, as both of our organizations are adopting their key strategic guidance for the future, with the recently adopted EU Strategic Compass, which was endorsed by EU heads of state and government in March, and the forthcoming strategic concept coming in Madrid. These two strategic processes provide a good opportunity to demonstrate transatlantic unity and solidarity. The progress in our cooperation is reflected in our progress report issued by the Secretary General and the HRVP last Friday. This report provides a detailed overview of the implementation of the 74 themes for cooperation that have been identified a few years ago. But NATO and EU should not rest on their laurels and have already started looking beyond what has been achieved with the 74 common proposals and how we can further expand and strengthen our cooperation. Indeed, the evolving security challenges and threats that both NATO and the EU are facing call for our partnership to further evolve and be fit for purpose. The war in Ukraine makes this very clear. So NATO and EU are looking at expanding their cooperation areas such as strengthening resilience, addressing the possibilities and challenges offered by new technologies, addressing the impact of climate change, tackling disinformation, or broader geostrategic competition, for example, stemming from Russia's aggression or China's assertive policies. In conclusion, and as you can see, NATO is addressing quite an agenda to remain agile and responsive to a changing security environment. And let me underscore how deeply, from our perception, has this environment changed in the last few months. All staff, from a sort of academic perspective, I would even stress further that changes of this magnitude probably happen only 2 or 3 times in a century. At least in the European environment. All staff at NATO and here at STO, together with allies, are actively working on addressing and delivering on all the issues I mentioned to ensure that the security of the 1 billion people we defend and protect is guaranteed, and that our core values of rule of law and liberty and democracy are upheld. So I very much thank the Science and Technology Board, the CSO and its members for the outstanding leadership they've shown in supporting the Alliance's wider agenda and guiding NATO science and technology development over the last 70 years. And I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to your questions.
So we have time for a couple of questions. We have 2 microphone handlers roaming the room. If you would like to ask something, please raise your hand and begin speaking once you have the mic in hand.
Cami, very good talk, thank you. And I agree that this is a tremendous challenge that we're all faced with. The U.S. Department of Defense released their National Defense Strategy about a month ago. In that, they described Russia as an acute threat, but China as an enduring threat. Do you think NATO will adopt some type of similar construct? Russia being acute, but because of economic factors, they won't be enduring. We have to worry about the nuclear and weapons of mass destruction. China enduring because they will use all aspects of warfare, gray zone, disinformation, economic, to slowly grind down the West. So it's a distinction, but I think it's important. How would you react to that from a NATO perspective?
First of all, I think we have to recognize that China and Russia are different from a NATO perspective. First of all, geography matters. We are a Euro-Atlantic organization, and that is making a difference, although we should always keep in mind that even if NATO has no intention to go to the Pacific, China is indeed present in the Euro-Atlantic area already, with some naval exercise jointly with Russia in both the Mediterranean and the Baltic Sea, with some increased presence in the high north, but also through technology in the cyberspace and space with a potential impact on our security. So I think those are the sort of two elements of our debate at NATO, which is to recognize on the one hand that obviously we're talking about two different elements. One is a rising power, the other one is a declining power, which is also something that we have to take into account. And one is also an important partner from an economic standpoint, a critical element of the global economy, a global market, of course. So it is a bit of a balancing act. I think the US description is quite accurate on distinguishing what is immediate versus what is a long-term point. But as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan recently emphasized, of course, the US will also continue to trade with China and doesn't want to isolate itself from China. So this is the sort of balancing act we have to find ourselves in Europe. The European Union characterized that relationship as being at the same time a partner, a strategic competitor, and a systemic rival. How do we try to think through this, which is a bit unprecedented? How do we deal with a major power that has doesn't share our values, doesn't share our vision of the rule-based international order, while at the same time is for most of our nation the first or second economic partner. So there are multiple challenges associated with that. What I do expect from the strategic concept, and notwithstanding the fact that there are debates amongst allies on how much we should focus on China, how much should it be a NATO core task to look at this. I think there is over time, or if I compare to where we were a couple of years ago, or where we were in the 2010 strategic concept, to take an interesting benchmark. Of course, China has become part of our strategic landscape, and many Europeans that were not necessarily paying a lot of attention to China in the strategic realm have recognized that we needed to be fully thinking through this. So this is again where we will find the balance, the fine-tuning of the wording in the strategic concept. I cannot share because it's not been agreed yet, so simply because it is a very important conversation amongst allies. And this is, I believe, a conversation that also needs to take place at the level of heads of state and government, as they will do in Madrid. But what is sure is that we will recognize that China is part of our strategic thinking, and that from this perspective, the situation has changed to where we were even a few years ago.
Thank you, sir. We have time for one more question.
Well, as you know, I used to be the director of AGOT many years ago. But also, as my name is Yaramovich, you may guess very well that I'm also of Ukrainian origin. So now, all of a sudden, there's a combination of really understanding what's going on both sides, here and there. But we are understanding on the other side. We're talking about sanctions. Sanctions don't work on the Russian population. They've been poor forever, and that doesn't quite work. So the impact on the population here in Ukraine is very important, and this is now genocide. Now, pretty soon it's going to start spilling over the Baltic nations and others. When does NATO start really getting very serious about using its advanced technology to stop the Russian invasion of of actually the Western world, pretty soon you'll be all hurting very much, and just words are not quite good enough.
Thank you for this. Let me first of all stress that we should not understate the brutality of what's happening in Ukraine. I was reading this morning the fact that the civilian casualties is about 10 times the military casualties for the Ukrainian people. So we're thinking in the realm of tens of thousands or close to 100,000 people that have been already killed in this war. And this is something in Ukraine only, Ukrainians only, and not to mention the Russian losses. So this is a war of a magnitude that we haven't seen in Europe in many, essentially since World War II, and without understating the atrocities committed during the Balkan Wars. But obviously here we have two large nations fighting a large-scale conventional war for months now, which is something we hadn't seen there. I concur with your statement that this is something that we have to recognize as a not only instability on our border, as we used to call crisis there, but as something which is a game changer, as I mentioned. I would first of all, in response to your point about what more could we do or should we do, state that we do a lot, and there I think many years, even a few months ago, probably allies would not have thought that they would be delivering billions of dollars or euros worth of equipment to Ukrainian forces. I can obviously not share the numbers, but they are extraordinarily significant, and they are making a difference. Again, not so long ago, and almost all allies are engaged in this to various degrees, and this is something that is really significant and making a difference. Of course, the bravery of the Ukrainian people, the courage of the Ukrainian leadership is critical. But I think without this support provided by European Union and NATO, European Union member states and NATO allies, the situation would be quite different. And this is something, again, if you think of previous conflicts that were happening recently, I mean, the natural tendency of many Europeans would be to impose an arms embargo on both sides and see where it goes. This is not what is happening today. And that is very significant, and that is a game changer. Secondly, the political support to Ukraine and the decisions that have been taken to mark for Russia the fact that this war was unacceptable is again to a degree unprecedented. We might say we underreacted to events in Georgia or in Crimea or in Donbass. Today, I don't think that the reaction qualify as being limited in scope or in political support, and there is a wide range support for the notion that this conflict needs to end with some sort of a strategic failure on the part of Russia. Having said all of this, we also are responsible for the security of our citizens, and this is where there has been a very deliberate effort on the part of the Allies and NATO to not escalate this conflict, to stay away from waging a war and becoming a co-belligerent in the conflict, because we have to recognize, and this is the reality, strategic reality, that we want to prevent also an escalation into some sort of a global conflict with a nuclear arms state. And that is a limit that we've set ourselves, and that is there. I don't think, but we've also made crystal clear that in the event of a spillover that you were mentioning, we stood ready to react, and that's why I was mentioning the readiness of our forces, the 40,000 troops put under SACEUR's command, the forward deployment, the additional forward deployment on the eastern flank. As we are in Paris, President Macron was just in Romania yesterday, visiting the French forces there. I'm sure General Lavigne and other military colleagues in the room will note that for the first time the deployment of IMD high-end assets in a forward deployment is extraordinarily significant. NATO, naval and air forces are constantly active on the eastern flank, but also with this intent of preventing escalation while providing robust deterrence and defense. We all very much hope and do everything we can to enable Ukraine to prevail, but we also have this responsibility of controlling escalation in an environment where I'm afraid we cannot state with certainty what is Mr. Putin's final intent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grand. We have a small token of our appreciation.